The sky over New York City was ablaze with streaks of light, each cutting through the atmosphere like the wrath of a vengeful god. At first, people mistook them for meteors, a spectacular celestial display. Within minutes, the truth became horrifyingly clear. Massive biomechanical ships, their surfaces pulsating with an eerie organic rhythm, descended from the heavens. The Zarnak had arrived. John Steele Andrews crouched low behind a toppled newsstand, his pulse steady despite the chaos around him. The former Navy SEAL had seen war zones before, but nothing like this. A plasma beam sizzled past, incinerating a nearby police car and leaving behind a molten husk. Screams of terror filled the air as civilians scattered in every direction. Andrews scanned the streets, his trained eyes searching for patterns in the madness. When he spotted a group of survivors pinned down near an overturned bus, he moved, instincts taking over. "Stay low," he barked, pulling a young man from the debris. "Head west toward the tunnels." "Go!" The man nodded frantically and sprinted away, clutching a child close to his chest. Andrews didn't wait to see if they made it. He knew the Zarnak war drones wouldn't hesitate. Towering insectoid machines, their legs bristling with razor-sharp appendages, skittered through the streets, herding humans like cattle. Their eyes glowed with an unearthly light, scanning for movement, for weakness. Elsewhere, deep in a subterranean lab on the outskirts of Boston, Dr. Marcus Reynolds hunched over a holographic console, his face bathed in the cool blue glow of data streams. A biologist turned nanotech pioneer, Reynolds had always believed that understanding life at its smallest level would unlock humanity's greatest potential. Now, it might be the only thing that kept him alive. He adjusted his glasses, studying a sample taken from the wreckage of a Zarnak drone. Its structure was an intricate fusion of organic tissue and mechanical components. "Symbiotic evolution," he muttered, awestruck despite the circumstances. His lab assistant, a jittery graduate student, whispered, "Dr. Reynolds, they're breaching the outer perimeter." Reynolds didn't flinch. He shut down the console, packed the sample into a secure case, and grabbed his go-bag. He wasn't a soldier, but he knew better than to wait for rescue. "Follow me. We stick to the evacuation routes." He glanced at the assistant, his voice hardening. "If we're caught, destroy the sample." In the shattered remains of Houston, Sergeant Frank Donovan ducked behind the blackened hull of a destroyed Humvee, sweat mixing with soot on his face. The ex-Marine was a man of action, his mind always focused on the next target. A group of ragtag resistance fighters crouched nearby, their makeshift weapons a stark contrast to the Zarnak's sleek war machines. "All right, listen up," Donovan growled. "We've got one shot to take out that drone cluster. My charges are rigged, but we'll need a distraction." One of the younger fighters shook his head. "It's suicide. They'll see us coming." Donovan stepped closer, his voice low and menacing. "Then don't get seen. Move fast, stay smart, or sit here and wait to die. Your call." Reluctantly, the fighters nodded. As the first explosions lit up the street, Donovan sprinted toward the objective, the weight of the detonator in his hand a grim reminder of what was at stake. In a cabin high in the Rocky Mountains, Sam Bear Owen scanned the horizon through his battered binoculars. A self-sufficient mountain man, Bear had lived off the grid for years, content to let the world pass him by. But even here, the invasion had reached him. The sky above Denver glowed with unnatural light, a beacon of destruction. "They're spreading fast," he muttered, his voice like gravel. His companion, a wiry teenager who'd stumbled into his camp days before, asked, "Can we stop them?" Bear lowered the binoculars and stared at the boy, his expression unreadable. "Stopping them ain't the question. Surviving them is." As the first Zarnak drones appeared in the valley below, Bear began securing his cabin, rigging traps with the calm efficiency of a man who had faced predators before. Across the country, scattered pockets of resistance began to form, but the truth was undeniable. Humanity was losing. The Zarnak didn't come to negotiate or conquer. They came to harvest. Entire cities were reduced to barren wastelands, their populations either slaughtered or captured. Ethan Carter sat in a darkened room, lit only by the flickering screens of his custom-built rig. The hacker's fingers danced over the keyboard, trying to break through the Zarnak's communication network. A former cybersecurity expert, Ethan had never considered himself a hero. But when the invasion began, his skills became a lifeline. Come on, he muttered, sweat beading on his forehead. The lines of alien code were unlike anything he'd ever seen, complex, fluid, almost alive. But Ethan was nothing if not persistent. When the first crack appeared in the network, he grinned despite himself. Gotcha. His triumph was short-lived. A nearby explosion rocked the building, sending dust and debris raining down. Ethan grabbed his equipment and bolted for the exit, his mind racing. He had the key to understanding their enemy, but it wouldn't matter if he didn't live long enough to use it. The survivors' paths began to converge. In the chaos, a message spread to the underground. A safe haven existed, hidden deep within the Rockies. It wasn't much, just an old Cold War bunker repurposed by a group of doomsday preppers. But it was enough. As Andrews led a group of refugees through the burning streets of Chicago, as Reynolds and his assistant trekked through the ruins of Boston, as Donovan detonated the last of his charges and fled into the night, as Bear held his ground against an advancing drone, and as Ethan raced toward the mountains, a singular thought united them all: survival. When they finally met at the bunker, battered and bruised but alive, there was no time for introductions. The Zarnak were relentless, and humanity's window for striking back was closing. Each man brought with him a piece of the puzzle, a skill or knowledge that could tip the scales. The alien invaders had underestimated them. Humanity wasn't just prey. It was a species that thrived on adversity, that adapted and evolved under pressure. As the group fortified their position and began planning their counterattack, a sense of resolve settled over them. The Zarnak believed themselves invincible, but they would learn, as all predators eventually did, that the most dangerous prey was one that fought back. The bunker was cold and dimly lit, the hum of generators filling the silence as the group gathered around a makeshift table piled with maps, alien schematics, and hastily scrawled notes. John Steele, Andrew stood at the head of the table, his sharp eyes scanning the group of men before him. Each had proven his worth during the hellish journey to the sanctuary, but now came the hard part, fighting back. Dr. Marcus Reynolds held up a translucent vial of iridescent fluid. "This is their lifeblood," he said, his voice steady despite the weight of his words. "What we're dealing with isn't just machinery. The Zarnak are a fusion of biology and technology, symbiotic. If we disrupt one, we weaken the other." Ethan Carter leaned forward, his wiry frame hunched as he studied the fluid under the dim light. "You're saying we can hack them?" His voice was edged with hope and disbelief. "Not exactly," Reynolds replied, "but their neural network is vulnerable. If we can introduce the right catalyst, something that scrambles their bioelectrical signals, we might sever their connection to the hive mind." "And you can make this catalyst?" Andrews asked. "I'll need supplies," Reynolds said. "Lab-grade materials, access to a clean room, and time." "Time's a luxury we don't have," Sergeant Frank Donovan interjected, his gruff voice cutting through the room. "They're spreading faster than we can keep up. If we don't hit them soon, there won't be anything left to save." Andrews nodded, his mind already calculating. "Then we'll buy you time. Donovan, you and Bear will secure the supplies Reynolds needs. Ethan, you're with me. If we're going to hit them, we need intel. Something we can use to pinpoint their weak spots." Sam Bear Owens leaned back in his chair, his broad frame casting a shadow over the room. "What about you, Steele? What's your plan while we're out there risking our necks?" Andrews smirked, his expression hard but determined. "I'll be where I always am." Right in the thick of it, the group dispersed, each man moving with purpose. Donovan and Bear set out under the cover of night, their journey taking them through abandoned cities and overgrown highways. The silence of the world was oppressive, broken only by the occasional drone of Zarnak patrols. Bear's survival instincts were razor-sharp, guiding them around danger with the precision of a seasoned hunter. "Hold up," Bear whispered, crouching low and motioning for Donovan to do the same. In the distance, a Zarnak drone stood motionless, its glowing eyes scanning the area. "Think it's scouting or guarding?" Donovan asked, his hand resting on the detonator strapped to his chest. "Doesn't matter," Bear replied. "We move now, we're done. Wait it out." Back at the bunker, Ethan worked tirelessly, his fingers a blur as he hacked into the Zarnak's communication network. It was like threading a needle blindfolded, the alien code shifting and adapting as if alive. "Got something," he muttered, his voice barely above a whisper. Andrews, standing watch over his shoulder, leaned in. "What is it?" Ethan pointed to a flickering screen. "It's a signal relay. Looks like they're using it to coordinate drone movements in this sector. If we take it out, we could blind them, at least temporarily." "How far?" Andrews asked. "Close enough to hit, but far enough to be dangerous." Ethan glanced up, his eyes meeting Andrews. "You're not seriously thinking of going out there, are you?" Andrews didn't answer. He didn't need to. Meanwhile, Donovan and Bear had reached an abandoned hospital on the outskirts of Denver. The supplies they needed rumored to be inside. The air was thick with tension as they moved through the crumbling halls, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. "This place gives me the creeps," Donovan muttered, his voice echoing off the walls. Bear grunted. "Better creeps than drones." As they rounded a corner, the faint hum of machinery stopped them in their tracks. A Zarnak scout, smaller than the war drones but no less deadly, skittered down the hall ahead of them. "Trap it or kill it?" Bear asked, his voice low. "Kill it," Donovan growled, already pulling the pin on a grenade. The explosion was deafening, the blast echoing through the hospital and sending debris flying. The scout was obliterated, but the noise would bring more. They moved quickly, gathering what they needed and escaping into the night. Back at the bunker, Reynolds worked with what they brought, his hands steady despite the weight of the task. He synthesized the catalyst, a glowing green liquid that pulsed faintly in its container. "This will work," he said, more to himself than anyone else. Ethan glanced over, his expression skeptical. "How do you know?" Reynolds met his gaze, his voice firm. "Because it has to." As dawn broke, Andrews led the team on their first offensive mission. The relay station loomed ahead, a spire of alien metal surrounded by a protective force field. "Ethan," Andrews said, his voice calm. "How long to disable the shield?" "Depends on how much they've adapted," Ethan replied, his fingers already working over his portable rig. "Give me 5 minutes." "You've got 3?" Andrews said, signaling Donovan and Bear to take up defensive positions. The Zarnak responded faster than anyone expected. Drones descended from the sky, their screeches filling the air as plasma bolts rained down. Donovan's explosives lit up the battlefield, while Bear's sniper rifle picked off targets with lethal precision. Ethan's voice cut through the chaos. "Got it. Shields are down." Andrews didn't hesitate. He charged forward, the catalyst secured in a canister on his back. He reached the base of the relay station, planting the device and activating the timer. "Fall back," he shouted, retreating as the timer ticked down. The explosion was blinding, a burst of light and sound that shattered the relay station and sent the remaining drones into disarray. As the team regrouped, bloodied but alive, Andrews looked at each of them, his expression hard but triumphant. "We just proved they can bleed," he said. For the first time since the invasion began, hope flickered in their eyes. The tide was beginning to turn, but deep in their hearts, they all knew the war was far from over. The ruins of Los Angeles stretched out like the skeleton of a once mighty beast, its skyline reduced to jagged spires and ash-choked air. Beneath the wreckage, the group moved with precision, their every step calculated and silent. The Zarnak Hive Queen was somewhere in the city, the nerve center of their invasion, and taking her out was their only shot at survival. John Steele Andrews led the way, his weapon slung over his shoulder and his mind running through every contingency. Each man had a role, and Andrews had drilled them relentlessly for this moment. Failure wasn't an option. Dr. Marcus Reynolds carried a modified version of the bioweapon, its green glow faintly visible through the reinforced casing. It was humanity's best hope, a cocktail of Earth microbes designed to exploit the Zarnak symbiotic biology. He tightened his grip on the container, his nerves frayed but his resolve unshaken. Behind him, Sergeant Frank Donovan checked his detonators, his face set in a grim scowl. "We've got one shot at this," he muttered. "If those bugs catch wind of us before we're ready, we're toast." "They won't," Sam Bear Owens replied, his deep voice calm as he scanned the area through his scope. "Not while I'm watching." Ethan Carter trailed at the rear, his portable rig strapped to his back. He was sweating despite the cool night air, his mind preoccupied with the task ahead. Breaking into the Zarnak Hive's neural network was a long shot, but if he could manage it, they'd have a chance to sow chaos in the enemy ranks. As they reached the outskirts of the hive, the air grew thick with an unnatural hum. The Zarnak had transformed the heart of the city into a pulsating biomechanical fortress, its walls alive with twitching tendrils and glowing veins. The sight was alien and horrifying, but Andrews didn't flinch. "This is it," he said, his voice low but firm. "Bear, you're on Overwatch. Pick off anything that gets too close. Donovan, you're with me. We'll plant charges on the outer defenses. Reynolds, stay with Ethan and get that payload ready." The team split up, each man slipping into his role without hesitation. Andrews and Donovan moved along the perimeter, placing explosives at strategic points. The Zarnak patrols were relentless, but Bear's sniper rifle spoke with deadly precision, dropping drones before they could raise the alarm. In the shadow of a collapsed skyscraper, Reynolds and Ethan worked quickly, their hands steady despite the tension. The bioweapon was ready, but they needed to get it into the hive's central chamber to ensure maximum effect. Ethan glanced at the glowing fortress ahead. "You think this is going to work?" Reynolds didn't look up from his task. "It has to." The first explosion rocked the ground, a thunderous boom that echoed through the city. Andrew's voice crackled over the comms. "Charges are live. Move to Phase 2. The Zarnak responded instantly. Swarms of drones poured out of the hive, their metallic screeches filling the air. Bear fired shot after shot, each bullet finding its mark, but the sheer numbers were overwhelming. "Time to go loud," Donovan shouted, detonating a second set of charges. The blast tore through the advancing swarm, buying the team precious seconds. Reynolds and Ethan sprinted toward the hive's entrance, covered by Andrews and Donovan. The ground beneath their feet seemed to pulse, as if the hive itself was alive and aware of their presence. Inside, the air was thick and humid, the walls glistening with an organic sheen. The sound of the hive was deafening, a constant thrum that seemed to vibrate through their bones. Ethan set up his rig near the entrance, his fingers flying over the keyboard. "I'm in," he said, his voice strained. "I can disrupt their coordination, but I'll need a few minutes." "You've got 2, Andrews replied, taking position to cover him. Reynolds moved deeper into the hive, the bioweapon secure in his hands. The central chamber loomed ahead, a cavernous space dominated by the hive queen. She was massive, her body a grotesque fusion of organic and mechanical, her eyes glowing with a cold, calculating intelligence. As Reynolds approached, the queen turned her gaze toward him, and a wave of drones surged forward. Andrews and Donovan opened fire, their bullets cutting through the swarm, but the numbers were overwhelming. "Now or never, Doc," Andrews shouted, his voice barely audible over the chaos. Reynolds stepped forward, his hands steady as he activated the bioweapon. The container hissed, releasing a fine mist that spread through the chamber. The queen screeched, her movements becoming erratic as the microbes began to take effect. Ethan's voice crackled over the comms. "Their network's breaking down. Whatever you're doing, it's working." The drones faltered, their movements disjointed and uncoordinated. Andrews seized the moment. Fall back. Everyone fall back. The team retreated, fighting their way out of the hive as explosions rocked the structure. The bioweapon was doing its job, destabilizing the hive's organic systems and spreading chaos among the Zarnak forces. As they reached the surface, Bear covered their escape, his sniper rifle still picking off stragglers. The hive behind them began to collapse, its glowing veins dimming as the Queen's control faltered. The final explosion lit up the night sky, a burst of fire and debris that marked the end of the hive. The Zarnak forces across the city fell silent, their connection to the Queen severed. The team regrouped on a hill overlooking the ruins, their faces smeared with dirt and exhaustion. For a moment, no one spoke. The weight of what they had accomplished hung heavy in the air. Finally, Andrews broke the silence. We're not done yet. This was just one hive. There are more out there. Reynolds nodded, his expression grim but determined. But now we know we can beat them. Ethan managed a tired grin. Yeah, and next time, let's do it without all the running. Bear chuckled, his deep voice rumbling. Where's the fun in that? Donovan lit a cigarette, his hand steady despite the day's chaos. One hive down. Let's see how many more we can take. As the first light of dawn broke over the city, the team stood together, battered but unbroken. Humanity had struck back, and for the first time since the invasion began, the future didn't seem so hopeless.